Hi, this is Kevin Bass from thedietwars.com. I'm a medical student and PhD student. I'm finishing my PhD. I've done 2 years of medical training. I have a long-standing interest in nutrition. I am studying inflammation in the gastrointestinal tract and did my master's on that topic. And now I'm investigating the mechanisms by which fiber, through a series of different transformations of the fiber that goes into the gut, signals to the gut and causes it to become less inflamed. And there are many compounds that mediate this. It's not just fiber. But that's a topic for another discussion. I'm also interested in misinformation. One of the things that I found when I went online to talk about diet, nutrition, and obesity was that the amount of misinformation online is enormous. It's about as bad as politics or religion or anything else in the social media era. It's ubiquitous, universal, and horrific. And today, I'm going to be talking about, perhaps not directly any misinformation, but I'm going to be addressing a great deal of mythology in the vegan community about the role of animal products and dietary protein in particular in promoting health. And I hope to challenge certain deeply held beliefs. I know that I certainly have when I first posted this on Instagram, and thereby help some people undergo a transformation in how they think about the role of dietary protein in aging. So, I'm going to start. Vegans would have you believe that there's no benefits whatsoever to eating animal products. Believe me, I sympathize with the vegans. I have eaten very little meat for the past 15 years. For 3 of these years, I was vegan. For most of these years, I've been a vegetarian. Or very close, flexitarian, with minimal meat intake. Today I'm a pescatarian, and I've been a pescatarian for the past 3 or 4 years. So I want it to be true that eating animal products is not healthy for anyone. That would be awfully convenient, because it would make the story of health and of my personal belief system line up perfectly. Unfortunately, reality doesn't always perfectly line up with your belief system. That's not the way that reality works. If we want to make the best decisions about our health, then we have to acknowledge reality. In a new randomized controlled trial published in October of last year in the British Medical Journal called Effect of Dietary Sources of Calcium and Protein on Hip Fractures and Falls in Older Adults in Residential Care, a cluster randomized controlled trial. It was conducted, I believe, in Australia. The main author is Australian. Sorry, the first author is Australian. In this randomized controlled trial, 7,195. It's more than 7,000 nursing home residents with an average age of 86 years. They were randomized into two groups to receive supplemental yogurt, milk, and cheese, or their usual menu. What happened? Well, as could be expected, daily intake of calcium doubled. Protein increased by 20%. The dietary protein intake increased by 20% from about 0.9 grams per kilogram to about 1.1 grams per kilogram. Now, 0.8 grams per kilogram is the recommended daily allowance promoted by the United States government, and roughly speaking, 0.8 grams per kilogram, or sometimes 0.83 grams per kilogram, is the RDA, the recommended daily allowance of protein in most developed countries and even less developed countries around the world. So, the residents in these nursing homes, these 7,195 residents, were all consuming above the recommended intake of protein. They were all, in other words, receiving more than adequate protein according to the current recommendations by governments around the world. And so, when they were randomized, when half of them were randomized to receive supplemental protein of more than 20% of what they started with, they were substantially exceeding the adequate recommended intake of protein according to governments around the world. What happened to people who are receiving this supplemental dairy with additional calcium and protein? Well, as you can see here in this figure, the rate of hip fracture was reduced by half. The rate of all fractures was reduced by about a third. The rate of falls was reduced by 11%. And this was only over the course of 24 months, 2 years. The effects indeed became apparent at 6 months. Merely 6 months, you already saw a large divergence in fractures and in hip fractures. a much lower rate of each at just 6 months. Now, this is a big deal, and that cannot be stated enough. Hip fractures are often the beginning of the end of the independent life, and sometimes the life itself, of elderly people. By dramatically reducing the rate of hip fractures, one dramatically increases the long-term quality of life in the people who avoided them. So this was something that was really good for these older people to have happen to them. To be in this trial, to be randomized to supplemental dairy, and avoid those fractures and falls. This effect may have been mediated in part of favorable differences in bone characteristics in the group receiving supplemental dairy versus the group receiving the usual menu. Likewise, the group receiving protein supplements, in fact, saw a slight increase in muscle mass, while the control group lost 1.7 kilograms or more than 5 pounds of muscle. This may in part explain the reduced rate of falls. It is possible that plant protein with calcium rather than dairy protein could have achieved the same effects. But what is for sure is that supplemental dairy has been shown in this study to play an important role in preventing debilitating bone fractures in the elderly. Supplemental dairy above the recommended daily allowance for protein. It also seemed to dramatically help with the body composition of these elderly people, suggesting that the recommended daily allowance is insufficient to support the muscle mass needs and the body composition needs of elderly people. So when one hears that the RDA is enough, in fact, less than the RDA is enough, the RDA is just built for added insurance. When you hear that from the likes of Dr. Greger, for example, such a statement is not up to date with either the latest literature or with this study. One should always be suspicious of somebody who can make their personal beliefs perfectly consistent with the evidence on a consistent and regular basis with very little or zero deviation. That is a sign of somebody who is not being straightforward about the science. Vegans, pay attention. It is better to accept these findings and try to build something out of them than to wave your hands and try to deny them. And it is my hope that by reporting this study and studies like it, we can work together to coming up with a more nuanced understanding of the role of dietary protein, including supplemental protein, substantially beyond the recommended daily allowance, on health, longevity, especially of our older people who are living among us. Our grandparents, our parents, and eventually us someday. If you've liked this video, check me out at Twitter at KevinNBass, KevinnBass, on Patreon at the same, KevinnBass. The more Patreon money I get, the better I can make these videos. And the more widely I can spread these messages to the people. Check out my podcast at The Kevin Bass Show on all podcast directories. Check out my YouTube channel at KBass Philadelphia on YouTube. Do a search under that name. Leave a comment. Subscribe. The subscribe button is right down there. Click that subscribe button to hear the best nutrition and health science content in the world. I'm not necessarily the number one. There are many very special people in this space, although a minority, but I am among those people. And so, if you click the subscribe button, you will hear the best stuff in this field and a scientific mind trying to come to terms with how to think about all of the evidence. And helping you with that as well. Leave a comment, it helps the algorithm. If you don't know what else to say, just say algo, or write KB, comma, and then leave your comment so that I know you've watched the whole video when I see your comment. And I know to prioritize it because I get a lot. If you want a consultation, send me an email, a direct message on Instagram or Twitter, and we can get something set up, or sign up to the top tier on Patreon, and we can also get something set up that way as well. Last but not least, check out my website at thedietwars.com and leave a rating or review on Spotify and especially on Apple Podcasts. And finally, follow on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, as well as subscribing down there. Hope you've enjoyed the video. I think this is a groundbreaking study and more people should be aware about it. Thanks for watching.